Marcus Thompson's 18-wheeler shuddered to a halt on the empty Montana highway, his calloused hands gripping the wheel as an inhuman sound pierced the 2 a.m. darkness. The cry that rose from the roadside wasn't quite a howl, wasn't quite a whimper. It was something primal, ancient, the sound a mother makes when she's lost everything that matters. There, caught in his headlight beams like a ghost made flesh, sat a massive gray wolf. She didn't run. She didn't snarl. She just sat there in the gravel, her pale blue eyes reflecting his truck lights, and wept with a grief so raw it made his chest tighten. Blood matted her silver fur, but she remained motionless, vulnerable, as if the weight of her sorrow had pinned her to that spot. Marcus cut the engine. The silence that followed felt sacred, broken only by her heartbreaking lament echoing across the endless prairie. His radio crackled, dispatch asking for his 20, but he couldn't move, couldn't breathe. What kind of pain could make a wild predator expose herself like this? And why did her cry sound so terrifyingly human? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Marcus Thompson had been running from stillness his entire adult life. At 52, he'd spent the last 25 years behind the wheel of his Peterbilt, chasing miles like other men chased dreams. The cab of his truck had become more familiar than any house he'd ever owned, which wasn't saying much, considering he'd lost the family farm in Nebraska back in 2008 when the banks came calling. The road had been his salvation then, and his prison ever since. Mile after mile of asphalt meditation, punctuated only by truck stop coffee and the distant voices on his CB radio. He'd grown comfortable with solitude, or so he told himself during those long stretches through the Dakotas when the horizon seemed to swallow everything whole. His ex-wife Linda used to say he loved that truck more than he loved her. Maybe she was right. The Peterbilt never asked him to talk about his feelings, never complained about missed dinners or forgotten anniversaries. It just carried him forward, always forward, away from whatever he was trying not to think about. Tonight's haul was routine. Medical supplies from Minneapolis to Spokane, the kind of cargo that paid decent but didn't inspire conversation. He'd been making good time on Highway 93, pushing through the Montana darkness with Hank Williams Jr., keeping him company on the radio. The plan was simple. Reach Missoula by dawn, grab breakfast at that diner with the good pie, and keep rolling west. But life, Marcus had learned, had a way of laughing at plans. The crying wolf had changed everything in an instant. As he sat in his idling cab, staring at the impossible scene before him, 25 years of emotional armor began to crack. There was something in her eyes, an intelligence, a desperation that spoke to the hollow place in his chest he'd spent decades pretending didn't exist. He'd seen plenty of roadkill over the years, deer and elk that hadn't made it across in time. This was different. This wolf wasn't dying randomly. She was asking for help. The realization hit him like a physical blow. Marcus reached for his CB radio, muscle memory guiding his hand to the familiar weight of the handset. His dispatcher's voice would be waiting, asking about his ETA, wondering why he'd gone silent. The smart thing would be to report his position, explain the delay, and wait for someone official to handle this situation. Instead, he found himself switching off the radio entirely. The silence in his cab felt different now. Not empty, but full of possibility. Outside, the wolf continued her vigil, her crying softer now, but no less heartbreaking. She seemed to sense his attention, turning those pale blue eyes toward his windshield as if she could see right through the glass into his guarded soul. For the first time in years, Marcus Thompson was about to do something that wasn't safe, wasn't smart, and wasn't part of any plan. He was about to care. Marcus climbed down from his cab with the careful movements of a man who'd learned that sudden gestures could change everything. The Montana night air hit him like a slap, carrying the scent of sage and something else, blood, fear, and that wild musk that spoke of untamed places. His work boots crunched on gravel as he approached the wolf, each step deliberate and respectful. She watched him come, those impossible blue eyes tracking his every movement. Up close, she was magnificent, easily 100 pounds of muscle and fur, her coat the color of winter storms. But it was the intelligence in her gaze that stopped his breath. This wasn't the blank stare of a panicked animal. This was awareness, calculation, and something that looked disturbingly like hope. "Easy, girl," Marcus murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "I see you there. I see you hurting." The wolf's ears swiveled toward his voice, but she didn't move. Dark stains matted the fur along her right flank, and Marcus could see the shallow rise and fall of her breathing. Wounded, exhausted, but still alert, still protecting something. That's when he noticed the pattern of her positioning. She wasn't just sitting randomly by the roadside, she was blocking access to something behind her near the tree line. Every few seconds her head would turn slightly, checking on whatever lay in the shadows beyond his headlight beams. Marcus pulled his cell phone from his jacket pocket, squinting at the screen. One bar of service, flickering like a dying candle. He'd driven this stretch of highway countless times, knew that cell towers were as rare as honest politicians out here in Big Sky country. But sometimes, if you climbed high enough or caught the signal just right. He walked back toward his truck, holding the phone above his head like some kind of technological prayer. At the edge of his headlight reach, the signal strengthened to 2 bars, good enough. The Google search for 24-hour veterinarian Montana returned exactly one result within 100 miles. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, DVM, serving the greater Flathead Valley region. The website looked like it had been built sometime during the Clinton administration, but it listed an emergency contact number. Marcus dialed, listening to the phone ring once, twice, 3 times. On the 4th ring, a tired female voice answered. "This is Dr. Mitchell. What's your emergency?" "Ma'am, I'm sorry to wake you, but I've got a situation here on Highway 93, about 20 miles south of Kalispell." Marcus found himself pacing, the way he always did during difficult phone calls. "There's a wolf by the road and she's hurt bad. Been crying for who knows how long." Silence stretched across the connection, long enough that Marcus wondered if the call had dropped. Finally, Dr. Mitchell's voice returned, more alert now. "You said a wolf? Sir, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Do not approach that animal. Wolves don't typically come near roads unless something is seriously wrong, disease, rabies, or they're protecting young. Any of those scenarios makes them extremely dangerous." "She's not dangerous," Marcus said, surprising himself with the certainty in his voice. "I can't explain it, but she's asking for help. I've been watching her for 10 minutes and she hasn't moved except to look back toward the trees. She's guarding something." Another pause. Marcus could hear the sound of sheets rustling, imagined the veterinarian sitting up in bed, trying to process what he was telling her. "What's your name, sir?" "Marcus Thompson. I'm a trucker. Been driving these roads for 25 years. I know what I'm seeing here, Doc. This isn't some rabid animal. This is a mother in trouble." "Doctor." Mitchell sighed, the sound carrying years of difficult decisions. "Mr. Thompson, even if you're right, I'm not equipped for large predator rescue. That requires specialized training, tranquilizers, protective equipment I don't have. You need to call Fish and Wildlife Services or—" "I tried," Marcus lied smoothly. "Nobody's answering. Look, I can see she's losing blood. How long does a wolf have with injuries like that?" The silence this time felt different, weighted with professional calculation. When Dr. Mitchell spoke again, her voice had changed, taken on the crisp authority of someone making a hard choice. Describe the wounds, as best you can, from a safe distance. Marcus looked back toward the wolf, who was still maintaining her vigil. Dark patches on her right side. Looks like she's favoring that leg. The blood's not flowing anymore, but her fur's matted with it. And Doc. She keeps looking back toward the woods, like she's got something there that matters more than her own pain. Pups, Dr. Mitchell said quietly. If she's nursing, that would explain why she won't leave the area. Mr. Thompson, I'm going to do something that probably violates every insurance policy I have. Give me your exact location. As Marcus provided the mile markers and landmarks, he felt something shift inside his chest, a loosening of the careful control he'd maintained for so many years. For the first time since he could remember, he was part of something that mattered more than schedules and delivery deadlines. The wolf continued her patient vigil, trusting him with her vulnerability. He wouldn't let her down. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's battered Ford pickup appeared on the horizon 43 minutes later, its headlights cutting through the pre-dawn darkness like twin swords. Marcus had spent those minutes in an odd communion with the wolf, talking to her in low, steady tones about nothing and everything, the weather, his route, the loneliness that seemed to seep into a man's bones after too many years on the road alone. The wolf had listened, her ears tracking his voice while her eyes remained fixed on the tree line behind her. Occasionally she would whimper, a sound so heartbreakingly human that Marcus found his own throat tightening in response. Sarah's truck pulled up behind Marcus's rig, and a compact woman in her early 40s emerged carrying a large veterinary bag and what looked like a modified dart gun. Even in the harsh glare of the headlights, Marcus could see the determination etched in her angular features, the way she moved with the efficient grace of someone accustomed to emergency calls at impossible hours. "You weren't kidding," she said quietly, approaching Marcus while keeping her eyes on the wolf. "I've never seen behavior like this. She should have bolted the moment she heard my engine." "That's what I've been trying to tell you," Marcus replied. "There's something different about her. Look at how she's positioned herself." Sarah studied the wolf's stance, her trained eye taking in details Marcus had missed. "She's not just guarding territory. See how she keeps glancing back? And the way she's sitting, that's not a defensive posture. She's presenting herself, making herself vulnerable. In wolf behavior, that's—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "That's almost like a request for help." The wolf's ears swiveled toward their voices, but she remained motionless except for that periodic check over her shoulder. Her breathing was more labored now, Marcus noticed, and there was a tremor in her legs that suggested exhaustion beyond the physical. "We need to see what she's protecting," Sarah said, hefting her medical bag. "But I need you to understand something, Mr. Thompson. If she has pups back there, and if they're threatened, injured wolves have been known to fight to the death. Even one this size could kill both of us if we trigger her protective instincts." Marcus nodded, but something in his gut told him they were safer than Sarah's professional caution suggested. "What do you need me to do?" "Stay back while I approach. If she charges, get behind your truck and don't try to help me." Sarah checked the dart gun, her movements efficient and practiced. "This contains enough sedative to drop a bear, but it takes several minutes to work. If something goes wrong, those could be the longest minutes of our lives." She moved forward with the careful deliberation of someone who understood predators, her body language non-threatening but alert. The wolf watched her approach, tension coiling through her massive frame, but she didn't retreat. When Sarah was within 20 feet, the wolf did something that made both humans freeze. She whimpered once, a sound full of pleading, then deliberately turned her head toward the forest and back to Sarah, as if pointing. The message was unmistakable. "Follow me." "Jesus," Sarah breathed. "I've been a veterinarian for 18 years, and I've never seen anything like that." The wolf rose unsteadily, favoring her injured side, and took several halting steps toward the tree line. She paused, looked back at the humans, and whimpered again. The invitation was clear, desperate, and utterly unprecedented. Marcus found himself moving forward before his rational mind could stop him. "She wants us to follow. Mr. Thompson, wait!" But the wolf was already limping into the forest, disappearing into the shadows beyond their lights. Marcus grabbed his heavy-duty flashlight from the truck and plunged after her, leaving Sarah no choice but to follow. The forest floor was carpeted with pine needles that muffled their footsteps, and the beam of Marcus's flashlight created a moving circle of illumination in the profound darkness. The wolf stayed just ahead of them, moving with obvious pain but unwavering purpose. Branches caught at their clothes and low-hanging limbs forced them to duck, but she led them deeper into the woods with the confidence of someone who knew exactly where she was going. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 5 minutes, the wolf stopped beside a fallen log that had created a natural shelter when it toppled. She turned to face the humans, then looked pointedly at the hollow beneath the log. Marcus played his flashlight beam into the shadowy space and felt his heart stop. 4 tiny forms huddled together in the makeshift den, their eyes still sealed shut, their movements weak but unmistakably alive. Wolf pups, no more than a few weeks old, their fur still bearing the soft, downy texture of the very young. One lay motionless at the edge of the group. "Oh, God," Sarah whispered, dropping to her knees beside the den. "She's been traveling back and forth trying to keep them warm and fed while dealing with her injuries." She reached carefully into the hollow, her professional assessment taking over. 3 alive, 1. This little guy didn't make it. The wolf approached her pups, ignoring the humans entirely now that her secret was revealed. She nuzzled each living pup with infinite tenderness, her earlier stoicism cracking as she realized help had finally arrived. The sound that escaped her throat wasn't quite a whimper or a howl. It was pure maternal relief. Marcus watched this display of devotion and felt something fundamental shift inside his chest. This wolf had endured pain, exhaustion, and the vulnerability of exposing herself to natural enemies, all to lead them to her babies. The level of trust she was displaying, the desperate faith that these strange creatures would help rather than harm, was humbling beyond words. "What do we do now?" he asked softly. Sarah was already unpacking her medical supplies, her movements sure and swift. "Now we save a family," she said, "and we pray that we're worthy of the trust she's placing in us." The wolf settled beside her surviving pups, her blue eyes fixed on Sarah's face with an intensity that spoke of complete surrender to hope. The emergency surgery took place in the back of Marcus's trailer, under the harsh glare of portable LED work lights that Sarah had brought. They'd moved the wolf, who Sarah had started calling Luna because of her pale blue eyes, onto a makeshift operating table constructed from Marcus's loading ramps and covered with sterile surgical drapes. Marcus held the light steady while Sarah worked, her hands moving with practiced precision as she cleaned and examined the wounds. Luna remained conscious throughout the procedure, her breathing shallow but steady, her eyes fixed on Marcus's face with an unwavering trust that made his hands shake. "She's been shot," Sarah announced grimly, probing the wounds with surgical forceps. "Buckshot, fired from close range. Look at this pattern. Whoever did this wasn't hunting for food. They were trying to kill her." The buckshot had peppered Luna's right flank, creating multiple entry wounds that had bled extensively. Some of the pellets had lodged deep in muscle tissue, while others had passed clean through. It was a miracle she was still alive, let alone able to travel back and forth to care for her pups. "Who would do something like this?" Marcus asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Someone who sees wolves as nothing but problems," Sarah replied, extracting another piece of shot with delicate precision. "There are still people around here who believe the only good wolf is a dead wolf. Ranchers who've lost cattle, hunters who blame wolves for declining deer populations. The old attitudes die hard. As Sarah worked, Marcus found himself studying Luna's face, amazed by her stoic endurance. Occasionally she would whimper when Sarah hit a particularly sensitive spot, but she never tried to bite or flee. It was as if she understood that this pain was necessary, that these strange humans were trying to help her. "There's something else," Sarah said, her voice puzzled. "Look at this." She parted the fur around Luna's neck, revealing a faint line of discolored skin. "She's worn a collar at some point, a heavy one, for an extended period. This wolf wasn't always wild." Marcus leaned closer, seeing what Sarah meant. The collar line was old, but unmistakable, suggesting Luna had spent a significant portion of her life in captivity. "You think she was someone's pet?" "More than that," Sarah said, continuing her extraction work. "The way she responds to human voices, her lack of fear around us, the intelligence in her behavior, this wolf was raised by humans, probably from a very young age." The implications of this discovery hung heavy in the air between them. If Luna had been domesticated and then released or abandoned, it would explain her unusual behavior, her willingness to approach the road for help, her apparent understanding that humans might be allies rather than enemies. "That makes this even worse," Marcus said quietly. "Someone raised her, earned her trust, and then threw her away." Sarah nodded grimly, dropping another piece of buckshot into a metal dish. "And now someone else has tried to kill her for being exactly what humans made her. A wolf who doesn't fear people." They worked in focused silence for another hour, Sarah removing shot fragments while Marcus held the lights and occasionally handed her instruments. Luna drifted in and out of consciousness, but whenever she was awake, her eyes sought Marcus's face as if drawing strength from his presence. Just after dawn, as Sarah was applying the final bandages, they heard the rumble of approaching engines, multiple vehicles by the sound of it and moving fast down the highway. Marcus looked up from the surgical site, his stomach clenching with sudden dread. "Company," he said tersely. Sarah's hands never paused in their work. "Could be coincidence. People use this road." But Marcus had spent enough years on these highways to know the difference between regular traffic and something else. These engines had purpose, destination, aggression. "We need to finish up," he said. "Fast." The first vehicle that appeared was a lifted pickup truck with gun racks visible in the rear window, followed by two more similar trucks. They pulled off the highway in a cloud of dust, parking in a loose semicircle around Marcus's rig. Men climbed out of each vehicle, 6 in total, carrying rifles and wearing expressions that promised trouble. The leader was a weathered man in his 60s with the bearing of someone accustomed to being obeyed. He wore worn hunting clothes and a baseball cap that had seen better decades, his pale eyes scanning the scene with calculating precision. "Name's Frank Harrison," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd been making decisions for other people his entire life. "We heard there was a wolf problem out here." Marcus stepped between Harrison and the trailer where Sarah was putting the finishing touches on Luna's bandages. "No problem here, just a veterinarian treating an injured animal." Harrison's eyes narrowed as he took in Marcus's defensive posture, the medical equipment visible in the trailer, and the unconscious wolf on the makeshift table. "That animal killed 3 calves on the Patterson Ranch last week. We're here to put it down before it kills more." "You're mistaken," Sarah said, emerging from the trailer with blood on her surgical gloves. "This wolf hasn't killed anything. She's been caring for newborn pups. She's barely been able to hunt for herself, let alone take down cattle." One of Harrison's men, younger and more agitated than the others, stepped forward with his rifle at the ready. "Don't matter what she's done or hasn't done, she's a wolf, ain't she? They're all killers given the chance." "Stand down, Tommy," Harrison said quietly, but his eyes never left Marcus. "We'll do this proper." He turned his attention to Sarah. "You the vet from Kalispell?" "Dr. Sarah Mitchell, and yes, I am." "Well, Doc, I appreciate what you're trying to do here, but you're interfering with necessary wildlife management. This animal is a threat to livestock and potentially to human safety. The responsible thing is to put it down." Marcus felt something cold and hard settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd had years ago when the bank officials had come to foreclose on his family farm. The sense of powerful people making decisions about things they didn't understand, reducing complex situations to simple profit and loss calculations. "She's not a threat," he said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "She's a mother trying to keep her babies alive." Harrison studied Marcus for a long moment, taking in his work clothes, his weathered hands, the defensive set of his shoulders. "You're the trucker who called this in?" "That's right." "Well, I'll tell you what, friend. You did the right thing calling for help. But now it's time to let people who know about these things handle the situation. You get back in your truck and head on down the road, and we'll take care of this mess." The dismissal was clear, the assumption of authority absolute. Marcus had encountered this type of man before, someone who'd spent decades being the biggest fish in a small pond, someone who expected deference from working-class people like truckers and expected to be obeyed without question. But something had changed in Marcus during the long night of holding lights while Sarah fought to save Luna's life. Something about the wolf's trust, her desperate faith that humans could be better than their worst impulses, had awakened something in him that had been dormant for years. "No," he said simply. The word hung in the air like a challenge. Harrison's eyebrows rose slightly, as if he wasn't sure he'd heard correctly. "Excuse me?" "I said no, I'm not going anywhere, and you're not touching that wolf." The other men began to shift and mutter, hands adjusting their grips on their rifles. The tension ratcheted up several degrees, but Marcus held his ground. Behind him, he could hear Sarah quietly moving equipment, probably preparing to defend Luna if it came to that. Harrison's weathered face darkened. "Son, you don't want to get in the way of what needs to happen here. We've got legal authority to deal with problem predators, and you've got no authority at all. You're just a truck driver who's gotten in over his head." "Maybe," Marcus acknowledged. "But I'm a truck driver who's not moving." That's when they heard the sound that changed everything. A small voice calling from the tree line, high and clear in the morning air. "Grandpa Frank! Grandpa! Stop!" A young girl burst from the forest, maybe 11 or 12 years old, her blonde hair flying behind her as she ran toward the group of armed men. She wore jeans and a wildlife conservation t-shirt, and her eyes were bright with tears and determination. "Emma!" Harrison's authoritative facade cracked, replaced by obvious concern. "What are you doing out here? You're supposed to be at home." The girl, Emma, skidded to a stop between her grandfather and Marcus, her small body creating a surprisingly effective barrier. "I followed you, Grandpa. I heard you on the phone talking about killing a wolf, and I couldn't let you do it." "Emma, honey, this is dangerous. These are wild animals." "She's not wild," Emma interrupted, her voice breaking with emotion. "I know about this wolf, Grandpa. I've been tracking her pack for my school project. She's never hurt anyone. She's been avoiding people trying to raise her babies in peace." Harrison's face went through several expressions: surprise, confusion, and something that might have been doubt. "What are you talking about, sweetheart?" Emma pulled out a tablet computer, swiping through what looked like dozens of photos and video clips. "I set up trail cameras in the National Forest for my wildlife behavior project. Look." She held up the screen, showing images of Luna and her mate hunting deer, playing with pups, avoiding human campsites. "She's not a cattle killer. She's just a mom trying to take care of her family." The evidence was compelling. Hours of footage showing Luna's pack behaving exactly as wild wolves should, hunting appropriate prey and giving human settlements a wide berth. Marcus watched Harrison's face as he scrolled through his granddaughter's documentation, seeing the older man's certainty beginning to crack. "Emma," Harrison said slowly, "where did you get information about cattle being killed?" The girl's face flushed. "That's what I'm trying to tell you, Grandpa. I've been monitoring all the wolf activity in this area. There haven't been any cattle kills. Someone's been spreading false information." The silence that followed was heavy with implications. Marcus could see Harrison processing this revelation, his weathered features showing the internal struggle of a man whose worldview was being challenged by someone he loved and trusted. One of Harrison's men, the agitated younger one called Tommy, stepped forward aggressively. "This is a bunch of liberal nonsense, Frank. Kids been brainwashed by those tree-hugger teachers. We came here to do a job, let's do it." But Emma wasn't finished. She looked directly at her grandfather, her young voice carrying a weight that seemed far beyond her years. "Grandpa, you taught me to always tell the truth and to protect things that can't protect themselves. This wolf can't speak for herself, but I can speak for her. She's innocent." The standoff that followed Emma's revelation stretched like a taut wire, ready to snap at the slightest provocation. Frank Harrison stood frozen between two worlds, the one where his granddaughter's innocent faith challenged everything he thought he knew, and the one where 6 armed men waited for his decision with increasing impatience. Marcus watched the internal war play out across the older man's weathered features. Here was someone who'd built his reputation on being the local expert on wildlife management, the go-to man when predators threatened the community's way of life. But his granddaughter's evidence was damning in its clarity, and the trust in her young eyes was something he couldn't dismiss. "Frank," Tommy pressed, his rifle shifting restlessly in his hands, "we came here to solve a problem. Kids got some nice pictures, but that don't change facts. Wolves are killers. Always have been, always will be." "Show me the evidence again," Harrison said quietly to Emma, his voice betraying none of the turmoil Marcus could see in his eyes. Emma eagerly pulled up more footage on her tablet, narrating each clip with the enthusiasm of a true wildlife enthusiast. "This was taken 3 nights ago, Grandpa. See how they hunt as a pack? They took down that old buck deer, the one with the broken antler. That's natural prey. Exactly what wolves are supposed to eat." Harrison studied the screen, his calloused finger tracing the movement of Luna's pack across the small display. Marcus could see something shifting in the man's expression, not just doubt about his mission, but genuine interest in what his granddaughter had documented. "And this one," Emma continued, swiping to another video, "shows the alpha female. That's her right there in your friend's truck, teaching the pups how to hunt mice. Look how gentle she is with them." The footage showed Luna in her natural element, patient and nurturing with her offspring, displaying none of the vicious behavior that justified her execution. She moved with the grace of a creature perfectly adapted to her environment, neither monster nor saint, simply a mother doing what mothers do. Dr. Sarah, who had been quietly monitoring Luna's condition during this tense negotiation, chose that moment to speak up. "Mr. Harrison, I need you to know something about this wolf's injuries. The buckshot pattern indicates she was shot at close range by someone who knew what they were doing. This wasn't a defensive shooting by a frightened rancher. This was attempted murder." Her clinical assessment hit the group like a physical blow. Several of Harrison's men shifted uncomfortably, and Marcus saw doubt creeping into faces that had been set in grim determination just moments before. "What are you suggesting, Doc?" Harrison asked. "I'm suggesting that someone has been playing you, Mr. Harrison, someone who wanted this wolf dead badly enough to wound her and then spread false information about cattle killings to ensure she'd be hunted down." Tommy's reaction was immediate and telling. His face flushed red and his grip on his rifle tightened. "That's crazy talk. Why would anyone do that?" But Emma was already connecting dots with the razor-sharp intelligence of youth. "Grandpa, who told you about the cattle killings? Who gave you the exact location where you'd find the wolf?" Harrison's eyes narrowed as he processed the question, his gaze moving from his granddaughter to Tommy and back again. "Tommy here brought me the information. Said he'd talked to the Patterson family directly." "I did talk to them," Tommy protested. But there was something defensive in his tone that made Marcus's instincts prickle. "They lost 3 calves last week. Found the bodies all torn up." "Then you won't mind if we call them right now," Emma said, holding up her phone with the confidence of a generation raised on instant communication. "I've got their number from the school directory." The suggestion hit Tommy like a thunderbolt. His face went from red to pale in the span of a heartbeat, and Marcus saw the telltale signs of a man whose lies were about to be exposed. The younger man's eyes darted between the faces surrounding him, looking for an exit that didn't exist. That's not necessary," Tommy stammered. "They're probably busy with morning chores and—" "Tommy," Harrison's voice had gone cold as Montana winter. "You got something you want to tell me?" The confrontation that erupted next revealed layers of deception that went far beyond a simple misunderstanding. Under pressure from Harrison's increasingly suspicious questioning, Tommy's story began to fall apart like a house of cards in a windstorm. The truth, when it finally emerged, was both simpler and more disturbing than anyone had imagined. Tommy worked part-time for Bradley Logging Corporation, the massive timber company that had been eyeing the national forest land where Luna's pack lived. The company had been trying for months to get permits to log that section of forest, but environmental protections for wolf habitat had blocked their efforts. "They said if the wolves weren't there anymore, the logging permits would go through easy," Tommy confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Said there was good money in it for everyone involved." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. "So you shot an innocent animal and then lied about cattle killings to get her hunted down?" "It wasn't supposed to go like this," Tommy protested weakly. "I just winged her. Figured she'd run off and take her pack with her. I didn't know she had pups. I didn't know she'd stick around." Emma's young face was a mask of heartbreak and fury. "You tried to kill her baby's mother for money?" The words hung in the air like an accusation that couldn't be answered. Harrison looked at the young man he'd brought into his hunting party as if seeing him clearly for the first time, and the disappointment in his weathered features was devastating. "Get off my land," Harrison said quietly. "Get off my land and don't ever let me see you again." Tommy tried to protest, to explain about the money and the opportunities, but Harrison's other men were already moving away from him, their faces showing disgust and shame at being associated with his deception. Within minutes, Tommy found himself alone, walking back to his truck while 6 pairs of eyes watched him go with expressions that ranged from contempt to pity. The departure of their unwitting conspirator left an awkward silence in its wake. Harrison stood with his hunting rifle hanging loose in his hands, looking older than his 67 years. The righteous certainty that had driven him out here before dawn was gone, replaced by the bitter knowledge that he'd been used as a weapon in someone else's war against nature. "Grandpa," Emma said softly, approaching him with the careful movements of someone trying to comfort a wounded animal. "It's not your fault. You didn't know." "I should have known," Harrison replied, his voice rough with self-recrimination. 40 years of hunting and tracking, and I let some corporate lackey play me like a fool, nearly got an innocent animal killed because I was too proud to ask questions. Marcus watched this family drama unfold with a mixture of sympathy and admiration. He recognized the courage it took for a man like Harrison to admit he'd been wrong, especially in front of witnesses. It was the kind of moral flexibility that many people never developed, regardless of age. Dr. Sarah, ever practical, chose that moment to refocus everyone's attention on the immediate crisis. Luna's stable for now, but she needs proper medical care in a controlled environment, and those pups need constant care if they're going to survive. "What do you need?" Harrison asked, and Marcus heard something new in the older man's voice. Not authority or command, but a genuine desire to help repair the damage his misguided mission had nearly caused. "Space, quiet, and time," Sarah replied. "Somewhere Luna can recover without stress, where the pups can be monitored and fed around the clock." Emma's face lit up with sudden inspiration. "Grandpa, what about the old barn, the one where you used to keep the horses?" Harrison considered this suggestion, his practical mind already working through the logistics. "It's got power, running water, and it's isolated enough that she wouldn't be disturbed. Hell, it's probably bigger and cleaner than most wildlife rehabilitation facilities." The offer was generous beyond anything Marcus had expected when he'd first seen those rifle-carrying trucks approaching. But as he looked at Harrison's face, he understood that this wasn't just about providing shelter for an injured wolf. This was about redemption, about a man trying to balance the scales after discovering he'd been on the wrong side of justice. "There's something else," Harrison said, his voice gaining strength as he made his decision. "Emma's right about those trail cameras. If she's been documenting wolf behavior in this area, then she's got evidence that could protect the whole pack from future harassment." "You mean it, Grandpa?" "I mean it, sweetheart. Maybe it's time this old dog learned some new tricks." As the group began making plans for transporting Luna and her pups to Harrison's property, Marcus felt something profound settling in his chest. What had started as a simple act of compassion, stopping to help a crying wolf, had evolved into something much larger. They weren't just saving one animal. They were building bridges between worldviews that had seemed irreconcilably opposed just hours earlier. But even as hope began to bloom in the Montana morning, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that Tommy's confession had revealed only the tip of a much larger iceberg. Bradley Logging Corporation had money, power, and strong incentives to see Luna's pack eliminated. They wouldn't give up easily. The real fight, Marcus realized, was just beginning. The converted barn on Frank Harrison's property became a sanctuary in more ways than one. Over the next 3 days, as Luna slowly regained her strength and her pups grew stronger under Dr. Sarah's careful monitoring, an unlikely community formed around the makeshift wildlife hospital. Marcus had called his dispatcher with a story about engine trouble, buying himself time he knew he couldn't really afford. His delivery schedule was shot, his reputation with the company hanging by a thread. But every morning when he walked into that barn and saw Luna lift her head in recognition, he knew he'd made the right choice. Emma had appointed herself as Luna's primary caretaker, arriving each morning before school with fresh bedding and detailed observations recorded in a composition notebook she'd dedicated to wolf behavior. Her grandfather watched these interactions with wonder, seeing his granddaughter's natural empathy for wildlife as something to be nurtured rather than discouraged. "She's got a gift," Frank confided to Marcus on the third morning, both men watching Emma gently examine one of the pups while Luna looked on with patient trust. "Never seen anything like the way animals respond to her." Dr. Sarah had established a routine of twice-daily checkups, monitoring Luna's healing and ensuring the pups were gaining weight properly. The smallest of the three was still touch and go, requiring supplemental feeding, with a specialized formula Sarah had ordered from a wildlife rehabilitation center in Colorado. But their peaceful routine was shattered on Thursday morning when 3 black SUVs rolled up Harrison's gravel driveway, followed by a gleaming silver Mercedes sedan. The convoy moved with the practiced precision of a military operation, and Marcus felt his stomach drop as he recognized the corporate arrogance in their formation. The man who emerged from the Mercedes was everything Marcus had expected, and worse. Tom Bradley was in his late 40s, expensively dressed despite the rural setting, with the kind of artificial tan that spoke of more time in boardrooms than outdoors. His smile was practiced and cold, the expression of someone accustomed to getting what he wanted through a combination of money and intimidation. "Mr. Harrison," Bradley said, approaching Frank with his hand extended in a gesture that managed to be both friendly and condescending. "Tom Bradley, Bradley Logging. I believe we've spoken on the phone about some mutual business opportunities." Frank kept his hands at his sides, making no move to accept the offered handshake. "Can't say I recall any conversation about business, Mr. Bradley. Certainly nothing mutual." Bradley's smile never wavered, but Marcus caught the flash of irritation in his eyes. "Perhaps there's been some miscommunication. I understand you're harboring a dangerous predator on your property." "As a concerned member of the community, I thought I should offer my assistance in resolving this situation safely." "The only dangerous predator I see is the one standing in front of me," Emma said, stepping out of the barn with Luna's feeding schedule clutched in her small hands. Her young voice carried an authority that would have been impressive in an adult, but was downright stunning coming from a 12-year-old girl. Bradley's facade cracked slightly as he took in Emma's wildlife conservation t-shirt and the fierce determination in her eyes. "Young lady, I don't think you understand the complexity of the situation here. I understand that you paid someone to shoot an innocent wolf and then lie about cattle killings," Emma replied, her voice never wavering. "I understand that you're willing to destroy a family for money." The accusation hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus watched Bradley's calculation change in real time. This wasn't the simple intimidation of country folks he'd probably expected. This was a well-informed opposition with evidence and moral authority. "That's a very serious accusation," Bradley said carefully. "I hope you have some proof to back up such claims." Emma held up her tablet, the same device that had exposed Tommy's lies 3 days earlier. "I've got hours of footage showing this wolf pack's normal behavior. I've got documentation of their hunting patterns, their territory boundaries, their complete avoidance of human settlements. And I've got Tommy Morrison on video admitting that you paid him to shoot Luna." Bradley's composure finally cracked, his face flushing with the kind of rage that came from having his carefully laid plans exposed by a child. "That's impossible. We have no connection to any individual named Tommy Morrison." "Actually, you do." Dr. Sarah emerged from the barn carrying a manila folder thick with paperwork. "I spent yesterday making some phone calls to colleagues in wildlife law enforcement. Turns out, Tommy Morrison has been on your company payroll for 6 months as a wildlife consultant. Interesting job title for someone with no wildlife education or experience." Marcus watched Bradley process this information, seeing the corporate executive's mind racing through damage control scenarios. The man was trapped, his lie exposed, but Marcus could see he wasn't ready to surrender. Men like Bradley didn't get to where they were by backing down from fights, even fights they couldn't win. "Regardless of whatever conspiracy theories you've concocted," Bradley said, his voice taking on a harder edge, "the fact remains that I have a legitimate business interest in this matter. That wolf was raised on property owned by my company. Legally speaking, she's corporate assets." The claim hit the group like a thunderbolt. Marcus felt the blood drain from his face as the implications sank in. If Bradley could prove legal ownership of Luna, he could seize her regardless of her current condition or the pup's need for their mother. "You're lying," Emma said, but there was uncertainty in her voice now. Bradley's smile returned, cold and triumphant. "Am I? Luna? I believe that's what you've been calling her. Was rescued as a pup from an illegal trapping operation 5 years ago. My company's wildlife rehabilitation program raised her from infancy, provided her with medical care, proper nutrition, and a safe environment." He gestured toward the barn where Luna was recovering. "She lived on our corporate campus for 3 years, serving as an educational ambassador for responsible forestry practices. She was featured in our advertising, appeared at company events, and became something of a mascot for our environmental initiatives. Marcus felt sick as the pieces fell into place. Luna's unusual comfort around humans, her lack of fear of vehicles, her apparent understanding of human behavior, it all made sense if she'd been raised in captivity and used as a corporate prop. "What happened then?" Frank asked, his voice tight with controlled anger. "If she was so valuable to your company, how'd she end up wild in the forest?" Bradley's expression darkened. "She became difficult to manage as she reached sexual maturity. Wolf behavior is unpredictable, and our insurance company expressed concerns about liability issues. The responsible decision was to relocate her to a suitable wilderness environment where she could live naturally." "You mean you dumped her when she stopped being useful for your PR campaigns?" Sarah said, her voice dripping with contempt. "We provided her with the opportunity to return to her natural habitat," Bradley corrected smoothly. "It was the environmentally responsible choice." Emma's face was flushed with tears and fury. "You threw her away. She trusted you, and you threw her away when she became inconvenient." "Business decisions are rarely sentimental, young lady," Bradley replied. "But they are legal. Luna remains property of Bradley Logging Corporation, and I'm here to reclaim our asset." Marcus stepped forward, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. For the first time in years, he felt the kind of rage that made men do stupid, dangerous things. "She's not an asset. She's not property. She's a mother trying to take care of her babies." "Mr. Thompson, isn't it?" Bradley had clearly done his homework. "I understand you're facing some financial difficulties. Truck payments, medical debt from your late mother's cancer treatment. I'm prepared to offer you $50,000 to walk away from this situation right now." The offer hung in the air like a poisonous fruit, tempting and toxic in equal measure. $50,000 would solve most of Marcus's immediate problems, would put him back on solid financial footing for the first time in years. But as he looked at Bradley's confident expression, Marcus realized that some things couldn't be bought, and some betrayals couldn't be lived with. "Keep your money," Marcus said quietly. "Luna stays here." Tom Bradley's confident expression shifted into something darker when Marcus rejected his offer. The corporate executive reached into his jacket and withdrew a folded document, his movements deliberate and theatrical. "Then I'm afraid this conversation is over," Bradley said, extending the papers toward Frank Harrison. "This is a legal seizure order signed by a federal judge. Luna is to be surrendered to Bradley Logging Corporation immediately, along with any offspring currently in her care." Frank took the document with hands that trembled slightly, not from fear, Marcus realized, but from barely contained rage. The old rancher's eyes scanned the official letterhead and legal jargon, his weathered face growing darker with each line. "This says you have 24 hours to comply," Frank said finally. "And if we don't?" "Then federal marshals will arrive to enforce the order," Bradley replied smoothly, "along with animal control officers equipped to handle dangerous wildlife. I'd hate for anyone to get hurt during the seizure process." Dr. Sarah snatched the document from Frank's hands, her medical training making her naturally detail-oriented. As she read, her expression shifted from anger to confusion to something that looked almost like hope. "Tom," she said slowly, and Marcus caught something familiar in her voice. "Tom Bradley. I remember you now." Bradley's confident demeanor flickered for just an instant. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" "We dated 3 years ago," Sarah said, her voice gaining strength. "You were working on some kind of corporate wildlife program, remember? You brought Luna to my clinic for her routine vaccinations." The revelation hit the group like lightning. Marcus watched Bradley's face cycle through several expressions. surprise, recognition, and what might have been genuine regret before settling back into corporate blankness. "That was a long time ago, Sarah," Bradley said carefully. "Things change. Business evolves." "Does it?" Sarah's voice was sharp with betrayal. "Because I remember you telling me how much Luna meant to you, how she was the one pure thing in your corporate world, how taking care of her made you feel human again." Emma stepped closer to her grandfather, sensing the adult tensions swirling around them but not fully understanding their implications. "Dr. Sarah, you knew him before?" "I thought I did," Sarah replied, never taking her eyes off Bradley. "I thought I was dating someone who actually cared about wildlife conservation, someone who understood that some things are more important than profit margins." Bradley's facade was cracking now, the smooth corporate executive giving way to something more raw and desperate. "You don't understand the pressure I was under, Sarah. The board of directors, the shareholders, the quarterly profit reports. Luna was a luxury we couldn't afford anymore." "She wasn't a luxury," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through the mounting tension. "She was a living being who trusted you, and you betrayed that trust for money." "Don't lecture me about betrayal," Bradley snapped, his composure finally breaking completely. "You're a truck driver who's about to lose his job over a wild animal. Sarah's a small-town veterinarian who'll never amount to anything. You're nobody, and this changes nothing." The verbal assault hung in the air like a physical blow, but instead of devastating his targets, it seemed to galvanize them. Marcus felt something crystallize in his chest, a clarity he hadn't experienced since he'd lost the family farm years ago. "You're right about one thing," Marcus said quietly. "I am just a truck driver. But sometimes ordinary people have to do extraordinary things because the people with power won't." Frank Harrison stepped forward, his weathered hands folding the legal document with deliberate precision. "Mr. Bradley, I've been dealing with corporate lawyers and government bureaucrats for 40 years. I know what these papers are worth, and I know what they're not worth." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying this seizure order is based on false premises," Frank replied. "It assumes Luna is healthy corporate property, not an injured wild animal with dependent offspring. It assumes there are no environmental protections in place, which there are, and it assumes you actually own a wolf that's been living wild for 2 years. Bradley's face was flushing red now, his corporate cool completely abandoned. "Those are legal technicalities. The courts will side with established property rights." "Maybe," Frank acknowledged. "But legal battles take time. Months, sometimes years. And in the meantime, Luna stays right where she is." The standoff stretched between them, corporate power facing rural stubbornness, money confronting principle. Marcus could see Bradley calculating odds, weighing the cost of a prolonged legal fight against the potential profits from his logging operation. That's when Emma made a decision that changed everything. The 12-year-old girl walked calmly to her grandfather's side, pulled out her smartphone, and opened the camera app. Before anyone could react, she was streaming live on social media, her young voice clear and confident as she addressed the growing online audience. "Hi everyone, this is Emma Harrison reporting live from Montana, where a corporate executive is trying to steal an injured mother wolf and her babies." "What are you doing?" Bradley demanded, lunging toward the phone, but Frank stepped smoothly between him and his granddaughter. "I'm telling the truth," Emma replied, keeping the camera focused on Bradley's increasingly frantic face. "This is Tom Bradley from Bradley Logging Corporation. He's trying to take Luna away from her babies just so his company can cut down the forest where they live." Marcus watched in amazement as Emma's viewer count climbed rapidly. Dozens, then hundreds, then thousands of people tuning in to watch this confrontation between a corporate executive and a child defending wildlife. The comments section was exploding with support for Emma and condemnation for Bradley. "The beautiful wolf you can see behind me is Luna," Emma continued, turning the camera toward the barn where Luna could be glimpsed resting with her pups. She was shot by someone this company paid to hurt her. She almost died trying to protect her babies. Bradley was panicking now, his corporate media training completely inadequate for this situation. "Turn that off." "You don't have permission to broadcast my image." "This is public property," Frank said calmly, "and my granddaughter has every right to document what's happening here." The live stream was going viral in real time. Marcus could see the viewer count climbing past 10,000, then 20,000, as Emma's story spread across social media platforms. Comments of support were pouring in from around the world, along with offers of legal assistance, financial help, and promises to boycott Bradley logging products. "Emma, tell them about the evidence you found," Dr. Sarah encouraged, recognizing the power of the moment. Emma needed no further prompting. With the natural confidence of her generation, she pulled up her trail camera footage and began narrating Luna's story for her global audience. The documentation was devastating in its innocence. Luna caring for her pups, avoiding human settlements, hunting natural prey, displaying none of the aggressive behavior that had been used to justify her persecution. "She's not a killer," Emma concluded, her young voice carrying more authority than any corporate spokesman. "She's just a mom trying to take care of her family, and these people want to destroy her for money." Bradley was trapped in a nightmare of his own making, his face growing redder as he realized the full scope of the public relations disaster unfolding around him. Corporate executives could manipulate legal systems and buy government officials, but they couldn't control the court of public opinion once it turned against them. "This is harassment," he stammered, looking desperately toward his security team for support. "We have legal rights here." "And we have moral rights," Marcus replied, surprised by the steadiness in his own voice. "Luna's rights. Her pup's rights, the right to live free from corporate greed." The live stream had become a phenomenon, shared and reshared across platforms faster than Bradley's corporate PR team could possibly respond. Wildlife advocacy groups were picking up the story, news outlets were requesting interviews, and Bradley Logging Corporation's stock price was beginning to plummet in real time as investors reacted to the viral controversy. Bradley's phone was buzzing constantly now with calls from his board of directors, his legal team, his crisis management consultants. Each conversation seemed to make him more frantic, more desperate to regain control of a situation that had spiraled completely beyond his influence. "You don't understand what you've done," Bradley said, his voice breaking with something that might have been genuine anguish. "This isn't just about one wolf. This is about a $50 million logging contract. Jobs, economic development, the future of the company." "Then maybe your company needs a different future," Emma replied with the devastating honesty that only children can deliver. "Maybe you need to find ways to make money that don't hurt innocent animals." The words hit Bradley like physical blows. Marcus watched the corporate executive's face cycle through a range of emotions: rage, desperation, and finally something that looked disturbingly like grief. "You don't understand," Bradley repeated, but his voice was quieter now, almost pleading. She was the only thing that made sense anymore. When I was with her, I remembered why I went into environmental science in the first place, before the meetings and the shareholders and the quarterly reports. The confession hung in the air, raw and unexpected. For the first time, Marcus glimpsed the man Tom Bradley might have been before corporate ambition had consumed whatever principles he'd once held. "Doctor." Sarah's expression softened slightly, recognizing echoes of the person she'd once cared about. "Tom, it's not too late. You could call off the seizure order. You could protect the forest instead of destroying it." Bradley looked at her with eyes full of something that might have been longing, then at Emma's phone, still broadcasting their conversation to thousands of viewers around the world, then at the legal document in Frank's weathered hands. "I can't," he said finally, his voice barely audible. "Even if I wanted to, I can't. The board would fire me, replace me with someone worse. At least this way I can ensure Luna is treated humanely." "No," Marcus said firmly. "There is no humane way to steal a mother from her children. There is no humane way to destroy a family for profit." The truth of those words seemed to break something inside Tom Bradley. The corporate executive stumbled backward, his face crumbling as 20 years of compromised principles finally caught up with him. And in that moment of his breakdown, none of them noticed the black SUVs quietly surrounding the property, or the federal marshals stepping out with weapons drawn. The federal marshals moved with the practiced efficiency of law enforcement professionals, their black tactical gear and serious expressions transforming the pastoral Montana morning into something resembling a military operation. Marcus counted 6 officers, all armed, all focused on the barn where Luna was recovering with her pups. "Federal marshals," announced their leader, a stern-faced woman in her 40s with the bearing of someone accustomed to unquestioning obedience. "We're here to execute a lawful seizure order for wildlife assets currently held on this property." Emma's live stream was still broadcasting, now to over 50,000 viewers worldwide, capturing every moment of the federal intervention. The comment section was exploding with outrage and disbelief as people watched armed officers preparing to seize an injured mother wolf and her babies. "This is insane," Dr. Sarah said, stepping protectively toward the barn. "Luna is still recovering from surgery. Moving her now could kill her, and separating her from her pups would be tantamount to murdering them." Marshal Jennifer Hayes consulted her tablet, her expression professionally neutral. "According to our documentation, the animal in question is healthy corporate property being unlawfully detained by private citizens. We're authorized to use appropriate force to recover the assets." "Assets?" Frank Harrison's voice cracked like a whip. "Those are living creatures, not pieces of equipment." But Hayes was already signaling to her team, who began moving toward the barn with the kind of coordinated precision that suggested extensive planning. Marcus felt something desperate and protective surge in his chest, the same feeling he'd had years ago when the bank officials had come for his family farm. That's when Luna made her presence known. A low, mournful howl rose from inside the barn, a sound so filled with anguish and maternal fear that it stopped the federal team in their tracks. Even through the walls, the emotional weight of that cry was unmistakable. A mother sensing danger to her children and calling out in desperate warning. The howl was answered almost immediately by other voices from the surrounding forest. Luna's mate and the rest of her pack had been staying close during her recovery, and now they were responding to her distress call. The haunting chorus of wolf voices created an otherworldly soundtrack to the unfolding confrontation. "Jesus," one of the marshals muttered, his professional composure cracking slightly. "How many of them are out there?" Marshal Hayes maintained her authoritative stance, but Marcus could see uncertainty creeping into her eyes. "Our orders are specific to the female and her current offspring. We're not here for any other animals." Emma stepped forward, her phone still streaming live, her young voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. "Please, don't take her away from her babies. She's still healing." "They need their mother." "Little girl, I understand this is emotional for you," Hayes said, her tone softening slightly. "But we have lawful orders to execute. These animals will be properly cared for at appropriate facilities." "No, they won't," Tom Bradley said quietly. Everyone turned to look at the corporate executive who had been standing in stunned silence since the marshal's arrival. His face was ashen, his earlier composure completely shattered. "What did you say?" Hayes asked. Bradley looked at the legal documents in her hands, then at Emma's streaming phone, then at the barn where Luna's distressed whimpering could be heard between the howls from the forest. "I said they won't be properly cared for," Bradley repeated, his voice growing stronger. "The board of directors has already voted. Luna and her pups are to be transferred to a private hunting preserve in Texas. Rich clients pay premium prices to hunt problem wolves in controlled environments." The revelation hit the group like a physical blow. Even Marshall Hayes looked shaken by the implications of what she'd just heard. "That's not what the seizure order states," Hayes said carefully. "The seizure order is the first step," Bradley continued, his voice taking on the hollow quality of someone who'd finally reached the bottom of a very deep hole. "Once Luna is legally removed from this property, Bradley Logging Corporation can dispose of its assets however it sees fit." Emma's live stream viewer count had exploded past 100,000 people, all witnessing this real-time confession of a plan to murder Luna and her pups for entertainment. The comment section was a torrent of outrage, with wildlife advocates, legal experts, and ordinary citizens demanding immediate intervention. "Doctor," Sarah stepped forward, her medical bag still in her hand from Luna's morning examination. "Marshall Hayes, as the veterinarian of record, I'm informing you that moving this animal at this time constitutes animal cruelty. She has surgical wounds that could reopen, and her pups are too young to survive without constant maternal care." "Dr. Mitchell, I appreciate your professional opinion, but—" "It's not just an opinion," Sarah interrupted, pulling out her phone to show Luna's medical records. "I can provide documentation that proves moving her now would likely result in her death and the death of her offspring. If you proceed with this seizure, you'll be participating in animal cruelty." Marshall Hayes found herself caught between competing authorities, the federal court order she was sworn to enforce, and the professional medical assessment of a licensed veterinarian. Marcus could see the conflict playing out across her features as she weighed her options. That's when Frank Harrison made a decision that surprised everyone. The weathered rancher walked calmly to his pickup truck, opened the glove compartment, and pulled out an official-looking document. He returned to the group with the measured pace of someone who'd been saving his best card for last. "Marshall Hayes," Frank said, handing her the paper. "This property was designated as an official wildlife rehabilitation site 3 days ago. As such, it falls under federal protection statutes for injured wildlife recovery." Hayes examined the document, her eyebrows rising as she read, "Mr. Harrison, this appears to be legitimate federal paperwork." "It is," Frank confirmed. "My granddaughter's documentation of Luna's pack behavior caught the attention of some wildlife biologists at the University of Montana. They expedited the rehabilitation designation to ensure proper scientific observation of the recovery process." Tom Bradley's face went white as he realized the implications. "That's impossible." "The legal seizure order supersedes any local wildlife protections." "Actually, it doesn't," Hayes said, consulting her tablet again. "Federal wildlife rehabilitation sites have specific legal protections that can override corporate property claims, especially in cases involving injured animals with dependent offspring." Marcus watched Bradley's world collapse in real time. The corporate executive had orchestrated an elaborate legal scheme to reclaim Luna, only to be outmaneuvered by a 12-year-old girl's school project and her grandfather's quick thinking. "This isn't over," Bradley said desperately, pulling out his phone. "I'll call the judge who signed the original order. I'll have this wildlife designation overturned." "Good luck with that," Emma said, holding up her own phone. "Because the whole world is watching now." She was right. Emma's live stream had become a global phenomenon, shared across every major social media platform and picked up by news outlets around the world. The viewer count had passed 200,000 people, all witnessing the attempted seizure of an injured wolf and her pups by federal agents acting on behalf of a corporation. The pressure was too much for Marshall Hayes. Marcus could see the calculation in her eyes as she weighed the potential consequences of proceeding with a seizure that was being broadcast live to hundreds of thousands of people, especially given the questionable legal standing and the veterinarian's medical objections. "I'm calling this operation off," Hayes announced to her team. "We need legal clarification before we proceed." Bradley's desperate protests were drowned out by the sound of celebration from Emma's global audience and the continued howling from Luna's pack in the surrounding forest. The marshals began packing their equipment with obvious relief, equally happy to avoid what had become a public relations nightmare. As the federal vehicles pulled away from the Harrison property, Marcus felt something profound settle in his chest. They had won this battle, but he knew the war was far from over. Corporate power didn't surrender easily, and Tom Bradley still had resources and connections they couldn't match. But for now, Luna was safe. Her pups were safe. And the whole world was watching to make sure they stayed that way. Emma ended her live stream with a simple message that would be replayed millions of times in the days to come. Sometimes you have to stand up to bullies, even when they're powerful, and you're just a kid. Luna can't speak for herself, but we can speak for her. And today, love won. As the sun climbed higher over the Montana landscape, casting long shadows across Frank Harrison's property, Marcus realized that his life had changed forever. He was no longer just a truck driver trying to get by. He was part of something larger now, something that mattered. He was Luna's pack, and she was his. And that bond, forged in crisis and strengthened by shared purpose, would prove stronger than any corporate scheme or legal manipulation. The real healing was just beginning. Dear friends, this story of Luna and Marcus touches something deep in all our hearts, the longing for connection, purpose, and the chance to matter again. Like many of us who've reached our golden years, Marcus felt invisible, forgotten by a world that values youth over wisdom. But sometimes life gives us unexpected opportunities to rediscover who we really are. In Luna's desperate cry for help, Marcus found his own voice again. In protecting her family, he built his own. This reminds us that it's never too late to choose courage over comfort, to stand up for what's right even when it's difficult. Every day, we pass opportunities to make a difference in our communities, our families, our world. The question isn't whether we're too old to matter, but whether we're still brave enough to try. Luna needed a hero, and she found one in an ordinary man who simply refused to look away from suffering. What would happen if we all stopped looking away? What wolves are crying by our own roadsides, waiting for someone to care? Share your thoughts. Have you ever had a moment like Marcus where helping someone else helped you rediscover your purpose? What's one small act of courage you could take this week to make a difference in your community? 6 months had passed since that dramatic morning when federal marshals had tried to seize Luna from Frank Harrison's property. The barn that had served as an emergency wildlife hospital had been transformed into a permanent rehabilitation facility, complete with proper medical equipment, climate control, and specialized enclosures for various species of injured wildlife. Marcus Thompson no longer drove 18-wheelers across the lonely highways of America. His new business cards read, Director, Luna's Haven Wildlife Sanctuary, and his office overlooked the sprawling acreage where Luna and her grown pups roamed freely, protected by federal designation and international attention. The transformation hadn't been without challenges. Marcus had indeed lost his trucking job, just as Tom Bradley had predicted, but the viral story of Luna's rescue had opened doors he never could have imagined. Donations had poured in from around the world, along with offers of volunteer help, professional expertise, and political support. What had started as one man's simple act of compassion had become a symbol of hope for wildlife conservation everywhere. Dr. Sarah Mitchell had relocated her veterinary practice to the sanctuary, establishing the first comprehensive wildlife medical center in the region. Her relationship with Marcus had evolved from professional partnership to something deeper, built on shared values and mutual respect rather than the passion of youth. They moved carefully, two people who had been hurt before but were willing to risk their hearts again for something genuine. Frank Harrison had become the sanctuary's education coordinator, leading tours for school groups and sharing his hard-earned wisdom about the delicate balance between human needs and wildlife preservation. His relationship with Emma had been transformed as well, the former conflict between traditional and environmental values replaced by a shared mission to protect what mattered most. Emma, now 13 and even more formidable in her advocacy, had become something of a celebrity in conservation circles. Her documentation of Luna's story had earned her recognition from National Geographic, the Smithsonian Institution, and the United Nations Environment Program. But she remained grounded by her daily work at the sanctuary, still arriving each morning to help with feedings and medical checks. The surprise visitor arrived on a crisp October morning, driving a modest Honda Civic instead of the corporate fleet that had once announced his presence. Tom Bradley looked older, grayer, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that spoke of fundamental changes in his circumstances and priorities. Marcus was checking the perimeter fence when he spotted the familiar figure standing uncertainly at the sanctuary's main gate. For a moment, anger flared in his chest, the protective instinct that had first driven him to shield Luna from harm. But as he approached, he saw something different in Bradley's posture, something that looked like genuine humility. "Tom," Marcus said carefully, keeping his voice neutral. "Wasn't expecting to see you here." "I know I don't have any right to be here," Bradley replied, his voice lacking the corporate confidence that had once defined him. I needed to see her, to see that she's okay." Marcus studied the other man's face, seeing exhaustion and what might have been genuine regret. "What happened to the logging company?" Bradley's laugh was bitter and hollow. "Gone. The board of directors fired me the day after Emma's live stream went viral. Stock price crashed. Environmental groups organized boycotts. Investors pulled out. Bradley Logging Corporation filed for bankruptcy 3 months ago." "And you?" "Unemployed. Unemployable, probably." Turns out corporate executives who try to have beloved wolves murdered for profit don't get a lot of job offers. Bradley looked toward the sanctuary buildings, where Luna could occasionally be glimpsed moving through the trees with her mate and grown pups. "But that's not why I'm here." Marcus waited, sensing there was more to this unexpected visit than a simple apology tour. "I've been going to therapy," Bradley continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "Trying to figure out how I became someone who could order the execution of an animal I once loved. The therapist says I need to make amends, not for forgiveness, but for my own peace of mind." "What kind of amends?" Bradley reached into his car and pulled out a thick manila envelope. "Legal documents transferring ownership of the 40,000 acres surrounding this sanctuary to the Luna's Haven Wildlife Preservation Trust. It's land the company owned for logging rights that we'll never be able to exercise now." Marcus stared at the envelope, hardly believing what he was hearing. "Tom, that land is worth millions of dollars." "Not to me," Bradley replied. "Not anymore. I've lost everything that really mattered. My integrity, my self-respect, my relationship with Sarah. The money was never worth what it cost me to earn it." "Doctor." Sarah emerged from the medical building at that moment, stopping short when she saw Tom Bradley standing at the gate. Marcus watched her face cycle through various emotions before settling into professional neutrality. "Hello, Tom," she said carefully. "Sarah, you look happy." There was genuine warmth in her smile as she glanced at Marcus. "I am happy. Really, truly happy for the first time in years." Bradley nodded, looking down at his shoes. "I'm glad. You deserve that." The conversation was interrupted by a low, musical howl from somewhere in the forest. Luna was calling to her pack, her voice carrying notes of contentment and security that spoke of a life finally lived on her own terms. "She's beautiful," Bradley said, his eyes following the sound toward the tree line. "More beautiful than I remembered." "She's free," Marcus replied. "That makes all the difference." Bradley spent the next hour touring the sanctuary, marveling at the facilities that had been built with donations inspired by Luna's story. He met the other rescued animals: bears, mountain lions, eagles, and dozens of smaller creatures that had found refuge at Luna's haven. Each enclosure was spacious and naturalistic, designed to provide comfort and dignity while animals healed from various traumas. The emotional climax came when Luna herself appeared at the edge of the forest, curious about the familiar scent and voice she remembered from her captive years. She approached the viewing area where Bradley stood, moving with the confident grace of a wolf who had reclaimed her wild nature while retaining her unique intelligence. For several minutes, woman and wolf regarded each other across the protective barrier, two beings who had shared a complex history of trust and betrayal. Luna showed no fear or aggression, only a kind of patient assessment that seemed to see straight through to Bradley's soul. "I'm sorry," Bradley whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm so sorry for what I did to you, for what I tried to do." Luna tilted her head slightly as if considering his words, then turned and trotted back into the forest to rejoin her family. It was neither forgiveness nor condemnation, simply acknowledgement of a past that could not be changed but need not define the future. As Bradley prepared to leave, he handed Marcus his business card, not a corporate card this time, but a simple piece of cardstock with handwritten contact information. "I'm working for a non-profit now," he explained. "Wildlife rehabilitation and conservation education. The pay is terrible, but the work actually matters. If you ever need help with anything, funding applications, legal issues, political advocacy, I'd like to help if you'll let me." Marcus pocketed the card, seeing possibilities for redemption that extended beyond individual healing to systemic change. "We'll be in touch." That evening, as Marcus walked the sanctuary grounds with Sarah, checking on their various charges and enjoying the peaceful sounds of animals settling in for the night, he reflected on the unexpected turns his life had taken. "Do you think he's really changed?" Sarah asked, following his thoughts with the intuition of someone who had learned to read his moods. "I think he's trying to," Marcus replied. "Sometimes that's all any of us can do, keep trying to be better than we were yesterday." Luna's howl rose again from the forest, joined by her mate's deeper voice and the enthusiastic yips of their nearly grown pups. The sound carried across the Montana landscape like a benediction, a reminder that some things, family, loyalty, the bonds between those who choose to protect each other, endure beyond corporate schemes and legal manipulations. Marcus had found his purpose in Luna's desperate cry for help, but the story was larger than one man's transformation. It was about the power of ordinary people to create extraordinary change when they refuse to look away from suffering. It was about the bridges that can be built between species when humans remember their capacity for empathy and protection rather than exploitation. As the stars emerged in the vast Montana sky, Marcus Thompson, former truck driver, current wildlife sanctuary director, and permanent member of Luna's chosen pack, felt the deep satisfaction of a life finally lived in alignment with its highest values. Some roads led to loneliness and disconnection, but some roads, if you had the courage to stop when you heard crying in the darkness, led home.